to do was watch the Discovery Channel. I guess you could call my mother a real Shark Week widow. Anything to do with sharks or wild boar or the dung beetle, this always fascinated her. She really loved the Golden Girls, Blanche, Dorothy, and Rose. Especially loved it when the Golden Girls were syndicated, because that meant it was on at least 3 times a day. And sometimes I'd say, Dad, you want to go out? And he'd go, if there is a heaven.
Someone's moving. The coffin's moving. I'm sorry. There's somebody in there.
No, it's moving. I just saw it move. Someone's alive in there trying to get out.
No, can't you see? What the hell is wrong with you people? The coffin's moving.
Oscar, sit down.
No, I just need to show you he's alive. No, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you. Wait from there. No, go ahead.
There's no time. Lost.
The time is
13
o'clock.
Hey everybody, it's episode 73. Kind of a paranormal extravaganza this week, I guess.
Why is that?
Well, something like that. Okay, now if you guys listened last week, like starting with our first show of the year, it's not really a restructuring, but we're going to try and incorporate like some more current events, like news of the weird type of segment, like at the beginning. And, I'm kind of going to try to tie them in with whether it's a paranormal or a true crime or whatever show. I mean, I'm not always going to be able to do that, I guess. So this week we're going to do like our little special thing at the beginning. I'm going to talk about a news story that I found about a guy in Phoenix and the family, and they were having some poltergeist activity and stuff like that. And then on the main portion of the show, we're actually going to talk about 2 pretty famous paranormal topics. Both of these were requests by 2 different people. The first one's going to be the infamous Belmez Faces.
Yeah.
And the second one is going to be Chase Vault, otherwise known as the moving coffins of Barbados.
Yeah, I heard about both of these a long time ago.
Yeah, these are both very famous stories, and like I said, these were both requests. Yeah. So we're going to get into that in the main part of the show.
Yeah.
But let's see. Before we do that, let's do our regular shout outs. Like I said, starting with the newest show of the first show of the year. We had the new theme, new opening and stuff like that. Hope you guys are enjoying that. And also I mentioned this on the last episode, but, starting with the first show of 2018, we started putting all of our patrons and supporters, their names in the credits of the YouTube show or in the descriptions of the audio version of the show. So that's, kind of a new little perk for everybody.
Yeah. And we got new ones too.
Yeah. And also we wanted to do, as we say every week, if you want to support the show, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/13o'clockpodcast, or you can go to our blog at 13o'clockpodcast.wordpress.com, and there's a little link in the sidebar to a PayPal account if you would rather do that. And we actually had a couple of people do that this week, and we would like to give them a shout out. So we're going to give a shout out to Lana, I hope I'm saying that right, and also Sandra. They actually went through PayPal and supported the show that way, so thank you very much for that.
Yeah, somebody paid it a whole year in advance.
Yeah,
too.
That was pretty rad, so,
yeah.
So thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
And also we have a new patron named James. So hello and welcome. And hope you guys are enjoying the show, and thank you so much for your support. It really does help a lot. Oh, also, if you haven't seen our latest movie review, we did Burnt Offerings, which was one of my favorite haunted house movies of the 70s. Yeah. So go check that out if you haven't already. And
Faceless Villain's selling like crazy on audiobook.
Yeah, and thank you.
Really
and
well.
Thank you so much for all the people that have written like all the really nice reviews, because I've read them all and stuff like that, and that's really rad. It's awesome that some of you wrote like a really long review and stuff like that, because that really does help.
Right, yeah. People who don't know who we are.
Yeah.
They see that and they buy the book. It's really good.
Yeah, so I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, and good news is that Jenny's already started on the second entry.
Yeah, I'm already working on the second volume, but hopefully I want to get it out before summer.
Right.
I want to get it out by like spring.
Yeah.
So hopefully
I think you're on what? You're on chapter 4, I think now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you already have the outline done and everything.
Yeah, I did a whole timeline and stuff like that. So It's going to have like, it'll have some well-known cases. I mean, Zodiac is going to be in there, obviously, and stuff. It's going to be from 1960 to 1980.
Yeah.
These ones are going to be.
Unseen Hand is also still kicking ass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so people still buying that. That's really cool, and hopefully...
We don't have any more codes for that one, though.
No, I ran out of codes for that one, but I still have some codes for Faceless Villain. So if you want one, then let me know.
Yeah.
And I will send you a free one. So let's get to our first little story. Now, this is a story I discovered. I don't think it really made the national press, but I found it on an Arizona newspaper site that was affiliated with USA Today. So I guess it's like the Arizona specific version of USA Today or whatever. And it actually came about because this guy published a post on his Facebook page with a video, and I guess it didn't really go viral in the sense that it was like millions of views, but it was like a shit ton of views. It was like 70,000 shares or something like that, which was kind of a lot. So this concerns a guy named Rudy Calderon, and he lives in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, he lives in a house with his aunt and his two cousins who are 14 and 17 and his grandfather. So they live in this house in Phoenix, and evidently this article was published on December 28th.
Okay.
And at this point, the supposed paranormal activity had only been going on for like a week.
Okay.
He says that it started on December 21st. He says, now the whole family were out shopping, so no one was home. Now the first thing they noticed was kind of minor. He said they came home and they had like a little plush, like a stuffed Santa Claus, and it had been in the corner of the living room, and it was moved into his laundry basket, like in his bedroom.
You know, it's weird.
What?
It's happening around Christmas time. So did mine. My poltergeist.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right.
Isn't that strange?
Emotions are running high.
Maybe that's what it is.
If it's the real thing,
yeah.
I'm interested. I'm very interested.
I mean, he's not... the thing that kind of makes me think that maybe he's not bullshitting, he's not really making any grandiose claims.
Okay.
I mean, it's mostly stuff like you saw.
Okay.
Or, just kind of little shit.
All right.
So that was the first thing. It was a little stuffed Santa Claus, and it was moved, and they didn't really think anything about it. Like, oh, that's odd. No one was home to do it. But, they just wrote it off like you would. And he says now the same day, later on, he had this box filled with coins that he had collected from all over the world. He's younger. He has I think he's only in his late 20s, but he has a degree in global studies, and he runs a business where, poor college students or minority college students who would like to spend a semester abroad but can't afford it. He has like a little setup thing where he, sends them on various trips overseas and stuff. So that's his business. But so he has this box filled with coins, and he said it was in his luggage, and then suddenly it was on the counter in the kitchen.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, and so it was just little things like that, like things being moved around.
Yeah.
And he's like, and at first we just kind of thought, oh, someone's playing a prank, or, they were kind of accusing each other like, hey, you're moving our stuff, blah, blah, blah. So then, December 23rd, he says he walks into the bathroom, and on the wall, there are letters in Yiddish in what appears to be charcoal.
Okay.
Now, his cousin was in the bathroom about a half an hour before, but says she didn't notice it. Because I guess maybe it was like behind the shower curtain or something like that. Now, he's like, I don't speak Yiddish. He's Catholic.
Right.
Or he was Catholic. I think the grandfather was Catholic, and then they converted to evangelical. But so he's like, none of us are Jewish. So he's like, we didn't know what it said. So he posted the picture on his Facebook page and was like, asking for translations. So apparently the Yiddish word means danger. Okay? So that's a little weird. Now, so at this point, they're all kind of, you did it. No, you did it. Nobody did it. Okay, so he's like that. So that kind of freaked them out. Now, on Christmas Day, the 2 toilets and 2 bathtubs in the house overflowed with water.
Okay.
So they called the plumber, who was the landlord's husband. He came and checked everything out, but he couldn't find anything wrong. Later on, he's like, they start praying because they're very religious. And he said they hear somebody banging on the front door. They open the door, there's nobody there. So it's all that kind of stuff. And, then they would go in the kitchen and like all the cabinets would be open, all that kind of stuff. And then he's just kind of like, I just went to Facebook to ask what to do. He's like, well, I couldn't call the police because obviously nobody had broken in and we didn't know what was going on and we thought they would laugh at us.
Right.
And so he kind of just posted this little video with the Yiddish letters and stuff like that. So they're freaking out.
Right. It's interesting that they didn't call the police because we didn't call the police either. We were just afraid that, that they would think you were lying.
Yeah, and that seems to be what they think as well.
Yeah.
it just says from his, and there was in the article that was in the Arizona paper, they have his Facebook post there and the picture and everything like that. And he's pretty much just asking for help. He's like, can someone translate this word for me? Can somebody...
Now, do we know if there's any young teenagers in there?
Okay, now the 2 cousins are 14 and 17.
That's right. It's for the 14.
So, yeah. Okay. So it might be that. It might be some kind of poltergeist activity that's happening.
If anybody knows this guy, have him contact us.
Yeah, his name is Rudy Calderon.
Right.
He doesn't super seem like he would be. And like I said, he's not making any hugely grandiose claims. Right. It's mostly just like stuff was moved around. There's like this writing appeared on the wall.
It's probably going to stop soon. Usually it only lasts a couple of weeks. But I'd love to see it again. Or maybe we'll send Steve Merritt down there to look at it.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. And like I said, I don't know if it's ongoing or anything like that. Right. I just happened to come across it, the article a few days after Christmas.
I looked for his Facebook briefly, and I couldn't find him. There's a lot of guys with that name. If anybody knows who he is, if anybody knows who he is and can send us his Facebook, I'd love to talk to him. Yeah,
it actually would be pretty interesting. Yeah. And I don't know if it's still going on or anything like that. Right. But like you said, it's probably something like, because yours also took place around Christmas time, but it didn't last very long. No. It was only a couple of weeks. Yeah.
So it may be over by now.
Yeah, so it might not be doing it anymore. And it doesn't seem to be, other than the word saying danger, it didn't appear to be threatening. Really.
The mine wrote go.
True, that's right.
Wrote it in wax on glass.
On the window.
Yeah, on the window.
So that seems to be.
It's weird that it wrote it in Yiddish though.
Yeah.
But I guess
and like I said, no one in the house was Jewish.
No, the subconscious can do powerful things, or it's a hoax. One of the two.
Well, obviously.
I'd like to get down to the bottom of it.
Yeah, it is interesting, but that was when I was kind of searching through. Yeah. Google for news of the weird for this week or whatever. That was one of the very few things that came up this week.
Yeah, it's good
in a paranormal vein.
It's good. I think it's good to do a current event with each show because there's stuff happening right now too.
Yeah.
Most of our shows are usually we're talking about something that already happened. Yeah. Well, it's cool to find out what's happening right now. That way, if we find out more later, we can say, you know what, we actually mentioned that in another show. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So I'd like to have the guy on.
That would be kind of interesting to see.
Sure. If anybody can find him for us, just send him our way. We'll get him.
Yeah, Phoenix, Arizona.
Phoenix, Arizona.
All right, so now let's get into the main topic of the show. Now, I don't remember who requested this one. I don't remember who requested the other one either. But I do remember both these topics were requested quite a while ago. Now, the first one is the Belmez Faces. Now, I first heard about this... And I don't know, maybe you people that are as old as we are, remember that Reader's Digest used to have like a book publishing arm.
Yeah.
And they would come out with these kind of compilation books.
Yeah, that's where I first saw this one.
Yeah, and this is where I first saw this one too. I have a story, and I have a book.
They were called like Mysteries of the Unexplained.
Right,
that
shit
kind
like
of stuff.
that.
Right,
and I still have the book. I have it right here in front of my face.
Yeah.
It is called Strange Stories, Amazing Facts. It's got a nice red cover right there.
Yeah.
Right. See, I still have it. I think one of my grandparents gave me this, or it was in their house and I took it. And
I saw that book.
Yeah. And it came out, I think it was published in 1976 or 1977. Okay. So I've had it since I was a kid. So it actually has a little sidebar thing about the Belmez Faces. Now, the interesting thing about the story as it is in this book, and the story as I researched it online, it's a little bit different. The one that turned up in the book, actually no one is named. Like the people that live in the house aren't named. It's kind of vague.
Right.
And in the story, in the book, basically it's saying there's an old woman and she lives in this house in Belmez, which is in Andalusia in Spain. And, it's like a little house with a concrete floor and stuff like that. And she has a baby, and the baby suddenly looks at the floor like, hey, wow, look at that. And then she looks over there, and then there's a face forming in the concrete on the floor.
Yeah.
And she wigs out and all this other stuff.
Now, to be clear, face forming in the concrete of the floor. It's more like a picture of a face forming in the concrete.
Kind of, yeah.
There's photographs of this stuff. It is kind of creepy looking. But go ahead.
There's tons of pictures of it.
Right.
So this actually started in 1971. And even though the book does not name the people, later on there were a bunch of other, studies of it. And because this has been pretty well documented by different parapsychologists, skeptical researchers, stuff like that. So the woman's name she's usually called Maria Gomez or Maria Gomez Pereira. I've even seen her called Maria Gomez Camara. So I don't really know what her actual name is. We'll call her Maria Gomez. But there was no baby in these other stories, so I don't know where they're getting the baby thing from the book, but whatever. Like I said, in the book, they don't name anybody. It's just like, hey, there's like faces appearing on the floor, and isn't that weird?
Yeah.
So it all starts in August 1971, and the first face to appear was just kind of, now some say it's a woman's face and some say it's a man's face. You can't really tell. It looks more like a woman's face to me, but whatever. So it starts appearing on the floor. Now, evidently, Maria Gomez was very upset by this. Now, she says that it not only did it appear on the floor, but that it changed position. Okay.
That it moved?
That it moved.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, I don't know if while it was forming or after it had formed or something like that, but it was moving around. But evidently it upset her. Uh-huh. And so she was trying to scrub it, like get rid of it.
Now, when she says it moved, the facial expressions moved, like it started talking, or the location of the face moved?
I mean, it seems like she's saying the location moved.
Okay, like it was sliding across the floor.
Yeah, now, I guess.
Just to be clear, if you're listening to this, it's not a 3-dimensional face like a sculpture. It's a flat, like a drawing of a face, or it looks more like a painting, kind of.
Yeah.
On the surface. She thinks it slid a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. I'm guessing.
Okay.
Now, the article that I'm reading about it right now that I have in front of my face says, while this face was forming, the stain was said to have moved position. And so she's not saying the expression changed.
Right. And it does look kind of creepy when you see the things. I remember when I first saw them when I was a kid, I was going, oh man, that shit's creepy.
I thought that too. Yeah, like when I saw, because I had this book when I was a kid, and there are two pictures.
Like, oh, that's
there's a picture of one of the most famous face, and then there's another one that's a little less clear.
They kind of look ghostly. If they take, when you're looking at them in the context of the story, you're going like, yeah, that's pretty creepy.
It is pretty creepy looking, I gotta say. So evidently, Maria was very upset by this. So she tries to scrub it out. It wouldn't come out. So then she asks her husband, whose name is Juan, and her son, whose name is Miguel. Juan decides, well, I'm just going to take a pickaxe and I'm going to just tear up that part of the floor and I'm going to reconcrete it, right? Okay. Problem solved. So they did that and then everything was fine for a couple weeks and then the face came back.
In the same spot?
I guess so. Or in a similar spot, like in the new concrete. So at this point, like kind of word had started to get around town and the mayor heard about it and he said, oh no, don't destroy it. Right. That's neat. Well, he had it kind of taken out and he wanted to study it and all this other stuff.
Well, this is Catholic country, man. They're into that kind of stuff. Right. This is a sign.
Now, at this stage, so they take that portion out and they like want to preserve it so they can study it and everything like that. Now, the story goes that when they dug down under the floor, they found some skeletons without heads.
Oh, shit.
And that these were about 700 years old. Okay. So maybe like a medieval type cemetery or something like that.
And this is confirmed.
I'm not sure.
All right.
But that's a fact that turns up in a lot of the stories.
It's already getting a good tale.
It's a pretty good story. Uh-huh. So I don't know. I'm just saying that maybe it was a medieval cemetery. Maybe it was people that were beheaded for whatever reason.
Well, a lot of stuff happened,
That's what I mean. The thing is, it's like in this part of Spain, maybe if you dug under anyone's house, you'd find like skeletons.
Europe is built on bones.
That's what I mean. It's Europe. So you know what I mean? So it might not be that weird. That might not really have anything to do with it. So they dug this hole up and stuff like that. And then they reconcreted the floor again. And now they're saying, okay, well, that's got to be the end of it. We found the skeletons. The skeletons were reinterred in a Catholic cemetery. Everything's fine. No more restless spirits or whatever. Later on, now multiple faces start appearing, not just one.
Right.
So evidently they're saying that one would appear and then kind of fade and then another one would come.
Right.
And all this other kind of stuff. And then there would be more than one at once.
Now, this was never caught in the act. In other words, no one actually saw these things form before their eyes, right?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
Now, as word started getting around, word got to Germany, and Hans Bender, who was a very famous parapsychologist, came to investigate it.
Yeah.
Now, what I find interesting about Hans Bender's involvement is that he's been quoted as saying, the Belmez Faces, it was one of the most important paranormal, happenings of the 20th century and stuff like that. Now, they say that he came there and that he sealed off the kitchen where most of the faces had appeared. And he put like plastic over the floor and put wax all around so no one could get in under there.
Right, yeah.
And then sealed off the kitchen. And now I've seen reports say for as long as 3 months, like no one went in there. And then when they went back and pulled up the undisturbed wax, that there were different faces or that the faces that had been there before were moved.
Right.
Now, this would seem to be a pretty monumental development.
Right.
But the weird thing is that it doesn't seem like Hans Bender published anything about this case. Like he mentioned it in some of his
So who's making
lectures.
the claims?
I'm just saying this is stuff that's like turned up.
Okay.
He mentioned it in some of his lectures. He would mention it in passing in like books about other things or like some of his compilations, but he didn't seem to write like a huge thing about it, which seems odd.
Yeah.
If that
especially for Bender.
Yeah, because
So Bender was making the claims that it happened. He was the one that said that he sealed off the floor, right?
Evidently, I'm just saying.
Did other people say
Yeah, see, I'm not really sure about that. I'm just saying, yeah. So then they had some other, that were more skeptical, more scientific kind of people come to investigate it. Now, one of the investigations was done by the Institute of Ceramics and Glass in Spain. And actually, there were samples sent to them. Now, this report is kind of unclear because some of them say that they said, oh, well, they didn't find any trace of paint or anything because they were looking for forgery hoax. Right. You know, because it had kind of started to get around that maybe it was faked. Now, they said they didn't find any paint. However, some other people that read the report said, well, they didn't exactly say that they didn't find paint. And also they didn't say like what portion of the concrete that they studied. Right. What like which face was it? Right. You know, so it wasn't super clear. Okay. Whether it was paint or not. Now,
so the skeptics are kind of calling bullshit on the methods used.
Right.
To try to confirm or debunk this.
Right.
Okay.
Some parapsychologists came and they didn't think it was a hoax necessarily, but they didn't think it was quote unquote spirits. Okay. They thought it was thoughtography.
Right, like RSPK.
Right, yeah, like Ted Sirios, the guy that could, you know, supposedly...
We got to do a show on Ted Sirios.
Probably should.
We're going to do one on that.
Yeah, he was the guy, if you don't know, that claimed that he could put his thoughts onto film. Like, it was a Polaroid, right?
He could grab a camera and look into it with a little... He had a little tube that he'd put around the lens and he'd look into it and go, ugh! And then when he went... sometimes you got to...
That's what you got to do to get the thoughts out of your brain.
And then you could develop the film and you'd see pictures of cavemen or fighter planes, things like that.
Yeah. So some parapsychologists thought that perhaps these were kind of like an RSPK phenomenon and that Maria Gomez, the woman that lived there, was some kind of unknown psychic medium or something like that. And she was putting these faces onto the floor. Right. Now, some of these parapsychologists said, well, it's because she's usually around when the faces, you know, when she's not there, no faces turn up. And they note that they're like, some of the faces have the same expressions as her or were in the same mood as her or something like that. Like I said, I don't know how that's very subjective. So there's that.
I have a question though.
Okay.
These pictures of these faces appearing in the concrete, were they in color? I've never seen any color photography of them.
They don't appear to be color, no.
Okay.
I mean, from what I've seen, I've only seen a few color photos.
So they're just different shades of gray, I guess.
Gray and brown.
Gray and brown of normal concrete type colors.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, as you would think, there have been a lot of skeptics and scientists and stuff like that studying this too, because this is a very well-known phenomenon. At
least it was back in our day.
It was, and Now, what they have discovered, I think, there was a article published in 1993, and this was actually in the Journal for the Society of Psychical Research. So this is not like a super skeptical, you know, kind of thing, but it's, you know.
Pretty skeptical.
Right. Now, he says that the chemical analysis on some of these faces, like, you know, the most famous one, which I think there's one called La Pava and there's one called the Bald One or something like that. I don't remember what they all have names, but I don't remember what they all are. Right. But he says that in the chemical analysis of the faces, there was actually an unusual amount of lead, which leads him to believe that at least some of the faces had been painted with some kind of enamel.
Okay.
So, you know, there's that. And there was also a book written by a sociologist, and he was very skeptical of the whole phenomena, and he kind of thinks the whole thing was a hoax as well. So even from the beginning of this phenomena, there have been skeptics coming in, and even like as parapsychologists coming in and thinking that probably this is a hoax, perhaps for financial gain, because after a little while, the faces started appearing, they started charging admission for people in the town to come in and see them. Right. And, it's kind of a big deal. They said they get a lot of people coming through there. And even though the family said they didn't like it, they
still collected the money.
Right. So even in 1971, which is the year that it started, they had a commission of technicians that came and they, conducted this huge study. And that report says that it could have been pigmentation with a dark brownish substance, quote unquote, a mixture of soot and vinegar, or the aggressive action of a chemical compound. Yeah. Now, some of the other skeptics that have studied it said that, it's quite easy to find an oxidizing agent that you could put on the concrete and that it wouldn't show up immediately.
It would take days.
It would take days. You said you could use muriatic acid, you could use nitric acid, you could use, even you could use silver nitrate, which actually, if you painted something on the concrete, it wouldn't show up until it was exposed to ultraviolet light, until sunlight.
Right.
So some of the skeptics have argued that what is going on is that now when it was analyzed with infrared photography, a couple of the skeptics said we could see brushstrokes.
Yeah.
So they're positing that some of the faces have been painted. Yeah. Some of them were made with some type of acid.
Yeah.
Some of them were made with acid and then painted over to make them look more, clear, I guess, if they didn't come out that good.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I can draw, all right?
Yeah.
And I can do faces. I'm pretty good at anime and sketching. And I'm looking at it now as an adult, all right? In these faces, I can spot a lot of amateur mistakes. You know what I mean? It's as if an amateur is trying to paint with watercolor.
Yeah.
I can see it now, and the proportions. It doesn't look like it was done with the mind, per se. It looks like it was done with the hand. Okay.
Now, I should say that they are very creepy looking, but as paintings, they are very amateurish. They're like folk art.
Yeah, you can see
is what they look like.
They don't flow too well. They're very wooden and they're not real lifelike. In the eyes, they're not lifelike. It doesn't look like something projected with thought. It looks like something that was actually done with an untrained hand. That's what it looks like to me.
And like you said, like I said, if it was done with acid, then you wouldn't be able to see it necessarily while you were painting it on there. So it might be kind of difficult to make it. Even if you could draw, it would be hard to get it to look.
But in the context of, hey, they're coming out of the concrete, mysteriously. We don't know who's doing it. They look creepy in that context. They are very creepy looking. But if somebody just walked up and said, "Look what I drew," I'd go, "Oh man, that shit sucks."
Right?
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing though is that to the parapsychologists or paranormal researchers that thought that maybe it was thoughtographic, that it was Maria Gomez, projecting her thoughts onto the concrete. Now, she died in 2004.
Okay.
And then for a while it stopped, but then the faces started up again.
Uh-huh.
And it was investigated, and the later ones they think were definitely hoaxes. They think it was her son Diego doing it.
And I bet you it was a different artistic style.
It might have been.
Yeah.
But, because I think, the town of Belmez, from what I can determine, it's not a huge town or anything like that. So they might get a lot of tourists and shit like that just because of that place. So it might behoove the local officials to kind of keep the shit going, even though the woman who originally started it is dead now. This
sounds a lot like a Catholic thing, kind of like a crying Virgin Mary statue,
Yeah.
There's a religious angle and it's a way of making money.
Or like the famous one in Clearwater. Do you remember that one? That looked like the Virgin Mary that was on the side of the window on the side of the building. I can't remember what building it was because I lived in Clearwater for a while.
Water stain?
Yeah. It was a water stain. It was from the water being sprayed up at the palm tree. It was like palm oil or something like that. Yeah. It didn't really, but it was.
If you say it looks like the Virgin Mary, you might go, yeah, okay.
If you were drunk and kind of squinted, it sort of looked like the Virgin Mary, but really it just kind of looked like a thing. But yeah. So, I don't know. It's like the fact that what I do when I research this show, it's like I said, I had the book that had like a little bit of an outline, and this is the first exposure I had to this case, was from this book in the late 1970s.
Yeah, when you're a kid, it trips you the fuck out.
Yeah, and it did trip me out. It's creepy. Yeah. The pictures are creepy.
Yeah.
And they don't have, it's only like 5 paragraphs, so it's not like super detailed, no names, no anything like that. It's basically just saying, hey, Flora started appearing in the floor, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty weird.
Then your imagination starts running wild because, they're leaving a lot of the story out.
Right. Yeah. So, but the more you look into it, and like I said, this has been, it's been, explored by so many different groups, and it's almost kind of like a he said, she said, but like skeptic said, parapsychologist said, you know what I mean? And they're all kind of saying different things, because there's been like all these chemical analysis done of it. Some say, oh, there's no paint. Some say there is paint. They've done infrared photographies, like there's definitely paint. Some people were like, yeah, there was all this lead in there, which, that's probably enamel paint. And some people were talking about like the oxidizing chemicals and stuff like that, which to me seems like the most likely thing, because like you said, if you used an oxidizing chemical like silver nitrate or something like that, you could actually paint it on there and then it would turn up later and you go, woo, magic, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like when sunlight shines on it.
Right.
So I kind of feel like that might have been what's going on. Now, the only thing that makes me question that is, why did Hans Bender say that he had been there and he had sealed everything off with wax, and that the floor and that the faces moved or something like that? Unless somebody snuck in there really quick and painted shit on there before he sealed it off.
Maybe there's a way to break to break the wax seal and then to reseal it back up without Hans Bender remembering what it originally looked like. Maybe.
Yeah, it could have been.
I don't know enough about his investigation.
Yeah,
or
I don't
if
either.
His investigation actually took place.
Right. And like I said, it seems odd to me that if that really happened, I mean, that seemed like a big deal. Why didn't he write a book about it? Because he wrote a book about other lesser impressive cases.
Yeah, when I think of Hans Bender, he was pretty much a straight shooter.
Yeah.
And, if he had found something, unusual about this case, he would have mentioned it more.
That's kind of what I think. Yeah. Because, like I said, he's written whole entire books about stuff that wasn't as impressive as faces appearing in a floor, for heaven's sakes.
Right.
So that kind of makes me think that maybe it didn't happen as advertised or something like that, because he would have made a bigger deal about it, I would have thought.
I think so too.
Yeah. Okay, so we're at the halfway point now. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the Chase Vault, otherwise known as
a good one too.
The moving coffins of Barbados.
The damn jumping coffins.
The jumping coffins.
It's like Mexican jumping beans, isn't it?
Yes, we're going to talk about that when we get back. We're going to take a break and we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, and we're back.
Yep.
Now, this was another listener request. We're going to talk about Chase Vault.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Now, this was also in this same book that's right here in front of my face, Strange Stories, Amazing Facts. So I read about this in the late 1970s. Now, this one had a little more detail than the Belmez Faces one did, but still not as many details as you can find now. But this is a pretty interesting story. So this vault is in Christchurch, Barbados, in this really old, like by this really old church. Now, the church that's there is not the original church because, you know, I think it's like the fourth church that's been on this because it was the first time it flooded and it burned down and all this other kind of shit. Now, the vault has been there since 1724.
Okay.
Although, this always struck me as weird. So they built the vault in 1724, but no one was put in it until like 80 years later or something like that. So it's just, it stood empty for a long time.
They bought it early and
I guess, or like...
Took a long time for the first family member to die.
Never know when you might need that.
Yeah.
So, according to the story, the first person to be interred in it was named Thomasina Goddard. Okay. And that was in 1807. Now, she was in a wooden coffin.
Okay.
And, you know, this coffin stayed and apparently it was fine and it was just undisturbed. Now, when another family bought the vault, this would be the Chase family, they left the original lady in there, even though presumably she's not related to them.
Yeah, it's not like they're going to evict her.
Yeah. Get out.
Get out of here.
So the Chase family buys it when, tragically, their 2-year-old daughter, Marianne Chase, died. So,
like they did back then.
Yes, she was 2. Yeah. So they put the little girl in there in a lead-lined coffin.
Yeah.
And like I said, the original woman had a wooden coffin.
Wooden one.
Now, the tomb was opened again in 1812, and this was another little girl. This was Marianne Chase's sister, Dorcas. And she starved herself to death, so I'm guessing she was a suicide.
Huh.
I don't know how old she was.
There may have been more to it than that.
Yeah.
Maybe she had some kind of a digestive problem. She couldn't eat, and then she starved. Or maybe she was, who knows, maybe they had anorexia back then.
Well, yeah, I'm sure they had anorexia back then. They just didn't call it that.
They just didn't know what to call it.
Right.
Yeah.
A month after, now they put the second coffin in there and everything was fine. But then a month later, the dad, Thomas, died. Now, they opened this was in 1812, they opened the tomb to put his coffin in there, and the 2 coffins of the daughters are evidently, not where they were left. Oh. Like, they were cut, standing on end and upside down and stuff,
really?
In the vault.
So they've been rearranged.
Right.
Like the Mexican jumping coffins.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, it should be noted that the wooden coffin of Thomasina Goddard, not related to them, had not moved. Okay. It was still sitting there in its regular place.
Yeah, I remember hearing this story back when I was a kid too, and I was going, wow, what the hell is that all about?
Right. So, and it didn't look like there'd been a sign of a break-in or anything. And apparently these coffins were pretty heavy. Like, it's not like one person could bust in. Right. And like one person could
so it's like something that 4 or 5 people have to move.
Right. Now, so they say, okay, no evidence of human tampering. No other vaults in the cemetery look like they've been disturbed because some people say, well, maybe it was an earthquake or something like that.
Right.
But, that's...
Earthquakes don't do that.
Well, yeah, and Barbados is not an earthquake.
But yeah,
it's not seismically active, so, So they put they were like, well, that's pretty weird, and they put all the coffins back to where they wanted and sealed the tomb back up.
Yeah.
Now, a few years passed until the next person in the family that was going to go in the vault died. And they opened the vault up again to put this next person in, and the coffins are all fucked up again.
Yeah.
They're all upside down and standing on their heads and stuff like that.
What about the wooden coffin? Has it been moved?
Evidently not. Okay. I don't think the wooden coffin ever moved.
All right. To the whole story. Now, as far as we know, this is just a story. We're being told this?
Yeah.
Or do we know that this actually
I'm going to get into that.
You're going to get into that?
I'm going to get into it. So, okay. At this point, so the story goes... They said, okay, well, maybe somebody's got to be coming in here.
Right.
So they put sand or wood ash or something like that, on the floor of the vault, and they raked it. So we're going to see if we see any footprints or anything like that.
As if they're planning for the next person to die.
Right. Yeah, and I think it was a little while because I think, like I said, it's kind of confused, but I think at one point there was an infant put in there and then there was another guy put in there and stuff like that. But every time they open it up, the coffins are always rearranged and apparently no footprints, no nothing. Right. Now, this is pretty weird, right? Yeah. And this is a pretty famous story.
Yeah, this is how I remember the story going.
Yeah, that every time they open it, All the coffins are moved around except for the wooden one.
Right.
Let's go back to the first appearance of this story. The first published version of this story turned up in a book called Transatlantic Sketches that was published in 1833.
Oh, so this is an old story.
Yeah. This particular account says, and this is a quote from the book, each time that the vault was opened, the coffins were replaced in their proper situations, that is, 3 on the ground side by side and the others laid on them. The vault was then regularly closed. The door, a massive stone which required 6 or 7 men to move, was cemented by masons, and though the floor was of sand, there were no marks of footsteps or water. The last time the vault was opened was in 1819. Lord Combermere was then present. He was like some kind of like the mayor or something like that, and he had come to hear because he'd heard about it.
Right.
So Lord Combermere was then present, and the coffins were found confusedly thrown about the vault, some with their heads down and others up. What could have occasioned this phenomenon? In no other vault in the island has this ever occurred. So, okay. Different versions of the story appeared over the years. Other accounts were published in 1844, 1860. This published version of the story evidently came from a rector of Christ Church in the 1800s. His name was Thomas Orderson or Thomas Harrison. Both names are given. And he evidently told this story. I don't know if he actually published. I don't think he published it anywhere, but most of the stories come from him.
Okay.
So in 1907, a guy named Andrew Lang, who was a folklorist, he got really interested in this story. And so he was trying to like trace it back, like where it came from. And he like did a really exhaustive search. And he pretty much found that all of the accounts that were published in this original book came from this one guy, this priest. And now he did examine the death records of, you know, all the people that were supposedly put in the vault. Now, all the people that died did die when they, like in the year that they were said to have died.
Okay, so the dates check out.
The dates check out,
okay.
But there is actually no solid proof that anyone was ever put in that vault. So we're saying the people did die.
Right, yeah.
But they don't know if that vault was ever used by anyone.
Okay, so the people died, but those coffins were never found inside that vault. There's no evidence that they were ever put inside that vault.
Right.
Okay.
And I'm not saying they weren't.
All right.
I'm just saying that this particular guy, when he did an exhaustive study, he couldn't find, he's like, I found evidence that they had died, but not any particular evidence that they were put in that particular vault.
Okay.
So
and no evidence that they were buried anywhere else.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure. He's just saying.
And in the time that he's doing this study, those coffins are not in that vault anymore.
Yeah. No, there is nothing in the vault now.
It's empty now. Okay. And during the time when he did his study, was there anything in that vault? I guess not.
1907.
Because he said that he had no evidence they were ever put in there. That infers that they're not in there.
That they're not in there anymore. Because at some point, like in the story, they said, they were sick of all the coffins moving around, so they took everybody out of the vault.
Okay.
Right. So this guy, like I said, Andrew Lang, he's the folklorist. He says, after combing through existing documentation to determine the veracity of the Chase Vault stories, Lang reported that he could find nothing to substantiate them, either in the Burial Register of Christ Church or in contemporary newspapers on Barbados, aside from an unpublished first-hand account by a guy named Nathan Lucas, who claimed to be present at the opening of the vault in April of 1820. Now, the interesting thing about this story is that a skeptical researcher named Joe Nickel, who he actually works for, I think, the Center for Scientific Inquiry or something like that. He does I've read a bunch of his books and articles and stuff like that. But he goes and investigates all these kind of famous paranormal cases. Now, he points out that this story actually has a lot of hallmarks of like a Masonic symbolic story.
Okay. He's
like, now an interesting thing is that there was another version of it that comes from Estonia.
All right. That
was around a similar time, 1840s, something like that. I think that story came out. And he said, and it's interesting because it has pretty much all the same, story beats.
Okay.
He's like, where they make a mention of the sand or wood ash on the floor. They make a mention of the guy being buried there who was a suicide because Thomas Chase was a suicide. They make note of the vault being sealed by Masons. And he's like, in this story in particular,
I gotcha. It could have been a Masonic code.
A Masonic code. Okay. And that's what he's saying. He's like, since there is no evidence that, he's like, yes, there's evidence that these people in Barbados died, but there's no evidence that anyone was ever put in this particular vault and that this stuff happened with the coffins.
Right.
And since there was another version of the story that was almost identical, that was written as a Masonic allegory that came out of Estonia, he's speculating that this story might have got repeated, you know, as a sort of Masonic code, meme or story, and that over the years the original source got lost, and so people started repeating it as a true story. So I'm not sure how true that is, but another thing I read too is that even if the coffins had actually been put into the vault, and if this story actually happened, if these coffins had been put in this vault, if they were actually moved around when they were opened, it's possible that they could have been moved around by water. Okay. Because now the way that this particular vault is situated, it's kind of close to, it's just under ground level. It's pretty close to water. In fact, the church that used to be there, the first one that used to be there, actually flooded out and they had to tear it down and build another one higher up. So it does rain a lot in Barbados. Yeah. So it's possible. I mean, lead line coffins are heavy, but
they might float.
But they could float if the equivalent amount of water kind of got into the tomb and kind of lifted them up. And
in the same way that a steel ship can sail. Right.
And another interesting thing too is that a lot of the bedrock and stuff like that of Barbados is limestone, which is very porous. Right. So they said if water could leach into this vault and then leach back out without leaving much of a trace. Right. You know, like I said, I actually read that on
and the
Skeptoid.
Yeah.
And he was saying, you know, he's like, I think that no coffins were ever put in this vault, that it was just a story. He's like, however, if it did happen that way, it is possible that water could have moved them around.
It sounds like to me it was just a good story.
Yeah.
And it made the Masonic angle, that may be true. Maybe he was sending a message out to other Masons, hey, I'm over here, this is blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And it symbolizes some kind of a Masonic ritual or Masonic values.
Yeah, he said because and actually Joe Nichols' thing where he talked about the Masonic thing, that was actually published. He published it in 1982. Yeah. You know, he said that the language used in the oldest accounts to describe the tale was laden with Masonic symbology. Right. So he's arguing that it's not something that was like a literal
It was a secret
thing.
message.
It was like a secret message kind of thing.
Yeah.
He said because in this story and the one that turned up in Estonia, there's a detail in the story that someone hammered on the wall to show how solid it was, you know, which kind of is a Masonic thing. There was an arched ceiling of the vault, representing the Royal Arch degree. You know, the idea of a secret vault is central to Freemasonry. And he's like, in both stories, they mentioned that the people that sealed the vault shut were quote unquote Masons.
I tell you what, the Masonic angle really, that sounds right to me.
Yeah.
It just kind of rings true. Although in defense of the tale, if they keep going to this vault to bury people and the coffins are rearranged, or, you know, they're thrown all over the place. How do you document that? Would that actually be documented? I don't really think it would. It would just, that occurrence would be handed down just as a tale.
Yeah.
Think about it.
And that's kind of something that,
so
you know.
What I'm saying is, yeah, maybe they were, you know, rearranged.
Yeah.
How could you prove that they were rearranged? You really kind of couldn't. It would just be a story that would be handed down. Kind of like, you know, my Poltergeist case. How could you actually prove that happened? I know it did happen. How do you document that? All you can do is tell the story.
That's what I mean. Right. And I think that happens. I mean, you know, we've kind of talked about this a little, touched on this a little bit on the show. That's kind of the thing about a lot of this paranormal stuff is a lot of it, there's no solid documentation. It's just somebody saw it.
And said
about it.
Yeah.
You don't know if that person is crazy. You don't know if that person is making it up. Maybe they're not making it up. Maybe it did happen. But there's no way of knowing that. And that's what's kind of frustrating about it.
That's what makes these things interesting, though.
But yeah, that's what makes them interesting.
To me, the Masonic angle rings true. I think that's very likely.
That does sound very likely. And
it sounds like a Mason put that story out in those days to send a signal out to other Masons.
Yeah.
They got off on that shit, making secret memes and shit like that.
And like I said, it's kind of a case. Yeah, it's kind of a case where like I said, you go back, there's a published account of it in the book that doesn't, in this 1833 book, that doesn't really give a source where it came from.
Right.
They discover it just came from this parish priest at a church like nearby.
Yeah.
So
the parish priest was a Mason, and he sends it out, and this is the church you need to go to if you're a Mason. I'm over here. I can help you out. I'll do Mason things with you. That type of shit.
And it's interesting how it happens, and I think this is a similar thing to what happened in the case of the ghost ship, the Orang Medan.
Yeah.
Where it actually started as a fictional story. Mm-hmm. But it just kept getting repeated and repeated. Yeah. And now, like, a lot of people think that it really happened, but it didn't really. It was just written as a fictional story. And, like I said, the same thing happened to Russian Sleep Experiment, like, the subject we did last week. It just started as a fictional story, and then it just kind of took off as the original source gets lost where it came from. Yeah. It happens, I guess it's easier when it happened back in the day because all you have some old book and maybe you don't even have that book anymore. Like, there's no copies of it. And old newspapers and stuff. Yeah. I think people tend to think of, the media like newspapers and stuff like that. Oh, well, I read this in the paper from 1870.
So it's true.
But they made that shit up back then too. And actually, I think probably more likely back then.
More likely.
Because,
yellow journalism.
Yeah, I don't really think they had any compunctions about making things up. No. So you have to be very careful. And like I said, I found this a lot in my true crime research too, is that you have to be very, very careful. That's why I like to kind of find like a bunch of different sources, like a bunch of different newspapers and stuff. Because one of them says this and one of them says that.
Newspapers.
Sometimes they don't even get fucking names right.
Right. Newspapers from the early 1900s and on back were just notorious liars, fake news generators.
Well, they were just trying to sell papers.
They were just trying to sell
just like
many
now.
papers
It's not any different.
You know what I mean? They the most outrageous fake news story about airships coming down, throwing anchors, and around the church steeples and coming down and having parties with people and then sailing off away. And the airship stories were, awesome. Some people would argue, well, some of those airship stories are, basically talking about UFOs. Well, maybe some of them were, but most of them were just hoaxes.
And the thing is, until someone invents a time machine and actually goes back and sees that shit, we're not going to know. So it's fun to speculate about.
Well, some people about the airship fake news things, man, they'll notice, well, hey, you know what? This newspaper over here at such and such date came out with an airship story, and it sold a lot of copies. And then surprisingly, in the town adjacent to it, it came out with 3 days later with their airship story. So the newspapers were playing off of one another.
Well, and like I said, back then there were a lot. I mean, one city would have like several different competing newspapers.
Yeah, so you had to make up some news.
Yeah, so if one had like a big story, it's like, hey, we need a story like that too. Let's like make it more outrageous than their story, so people will buy our paper instead of theirs. So there was a lot of that kind of shit going on.
Yeah, back when I was in junior high, we had a whole thing in American history class, about yellow journalism. Yeah. That was a huge problem back then.
Yeah, I've read a couple of books about the same, about kind of the early days of, newspaper, like the big newspapers and stuff like that.
Couldn't trust the paper as far as you could throw it back then.
And especially if it was, and I'm not saying that a lot of the stuff back then didn't happen. It's just that they would kind of hype the shit out of it. Yeah. And they would just make up, all this kind of stuff. I think we talked about it a little bit on the H.H. Holmes case.
Yeah.
About the kind of murder castle and everything, how some of that might have been exaggerated.
Fake news, yeah.
But yeah. You know what I learned? Isn't it weird that I've gotten to this age and I never knew the difference? I always thought the words coffin and casket were synonyms.
They're not?
They're not.
Oh, okay.
A coffin is, the one that's shaped like diamond shaped, like a Dracula coffin. A casket is a square box.
Oh, okay. All right.
I was like, holy shit, I didn't know that.
Okay. So they're not the same thing.
I thought they were just two words for the same thing, and they're not. So the more you know. You learn things new every day.
There you go.
But yeah, like I said, the interesting thing, like there's a big long article on Skeptoid. I think it was written by Brian Dunning, where he was talking about the Chase Vault case. And he said a very interesting thing, and it might have been actually Joe Nickel that said this initially. He's like, whenever you're investigating like a weird case or a paranormal case, he's like, before you even get into how this could have happened, he's like, you have to make sure it actually did happen.
Right. Yeah.
He's like, because I think the Chase Vault thing is a kind of a case where this shit didn't even happen to start with, but then later people are trying to explain how it was. But like I said, Brian...
It sounds like a Masonic message.
Yeah, and that's kind of what he's saying it is.
That's what I probably
Although,
think
like I said, in the article that Brian Dunning wrote is saying, I think it's a Masonic and it was just a story and no one was ever buried in this vault, ever, not even the wooden coffin.
It was a Mason sending out a signal.
But he's like, if there had been coffins in there, he actually did the math and determined how much water it would have taken to get into the vault. And he's like, it would have been possible for water to get into the vault, move the coffins around, and then leach back out without leaving much evidence of its presence.
It sounds Masonic. You know, there are some weird structures here in the United States that have been discovered out in the woods. No explanation. Possibly Masonic stuff. Weird tunnels that go into the sides of mountains made by hand that end up into the little tiny cubicles. And only on certain days does the rising sun shines directly down into that
that's
tunnel.
Some Stonehenge shit.
And they figured they're not sure when they were made. Maybe 1600s, maybe 1700s, maybe 1800s. Huge mounds. Yeah. They don't know if the Native Americans made those or Masons made those, but they've got weird shit here, even in the United States.
Yeah. We should do a show on that, actually. Yeah. That might be fascinating.
And evidently, construction companies would come right down and just level that shit like it was nothing and put them all there.
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah. For all you know, that might have been something from the Stone Age, you know what I mean?
We need another Starbucks on this spot immediately.
Here. Tear that shit down.
Tear that shit down. But yeah, so probably just a story that kind of got turned into. Yeah, that I'm kind of leaning toward that as well. But it's a good story, and it's, you know, one that I had been hearing about since the 70s. So I'm glad I actually kind of got to research it a little bit more. So that'll do it for our paranormal extravaganza episode.
It was an extravaganza.
Wasn't it though? Oh my gosh, I just can't even. We should have like little party horns and shit. Yeah. If you like the show, please remember to like, share, subscribe on all your social media and all that business. Go follow us on Twitter. Go like us on Facebook, all that normal shit. And also, if you'd like to support the show, you can go to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/13o'clock podcast. And also, if you would rather not deal with Patreon because some of you don't like it, I know, then you can go to our blog, which is 13o'clockpodcast.wordpress.com. And there is a link in the sidebar to a PayPal account if you would like to support the show that way. That would be super awesome. Also, don't forget to check out our latest movie review, which is Burnt Offerings. Go check out our t-shirts at Zazzle.com/13o'clock. We have 6 different designs you may choose from if you would like to.
They're all awesome.
And they are quite awesome, actually, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, we got a Snake Plissken one up there, don't we?
Yeah, I did put... I forgot. I totally forgot about that one. Yeah, I did put a Snake Plissken one up there, didn't I?
I want a Snake Plissken shirt.
You haven't even got one yet.
I haven't got it.
I know. It's been up there for like a long time.
I'll get it.
Yeah, you should get that. Mm-hmm. And that'll do it for this episode, and we will see you next Tuesday. Bye.